The moment she walked into Thornycroft Hall, I knew she was lying. Not about anything wicked, not the kind of lie I was accustomed to from the women who came to Lord and Lady Ashby's autumn parties with schemes behind their smiles and titles they had married into like ill-fitting coats. This was a quieter untruth. She carried herself like a woman who had been trained to make herself smaller than she was, and no amount of training could quite accomplish it. The bones would not allow it. The eyes, most of all, would not allow it. She was introduced to me as Miss Lane. A paid companion, Lady Ashby whispered at my elbow with that particular arch of her brow she reserved for social footnotes. A pleasant girl from a reduced family, engaged for the season to assist with the correspondence and keep old Mrs. Pemberton company during the card evenings. She wore a grey dress, serviceable, plain, the kind of garment designed to fade into wallpaper, and she was introduced at the far end of the receiving line, below the daughters of earls and well above the footmen, in that precise social purgatory reserved for women the world could not quite categorize. I was the Duke of Greythorne. I was feared in 3 counties and bored in all of them. I should have looked away. I did not. She did not simper when introduced. She met my eyes for exactly the correct span of time, neither boldly nor evasively, and then inclined her head in a way so precisely calibrated it set something ringing in the back of my mind like a bell struck in a distant room. A paid companion did not curtsy like that. A paid companion did not arrange her hands in her lap at dinner with that particular stillness, the stillness of a woman who had sat at very formal tables and learned not to fidget, because someone important was watching. She was seated far from me at the long table. I rearranged matters so that she was not. My friend Carlestle noticed, naturally. He leaned toward me between the fish course and the roast and murmured, "You are staring at the Ashby woman's hired girl." "I am observing," I said. "That is what men say when they are staring." I ignored him and watched Miss Lane deflect 3 separate attempts by Lady Ashby's eldest to draw her into gossip. She did it without rudeness, without subservience, with a deft wit that left the eldest looking faintly puzzled, as if she had tried to corner a cat and found nothing there. Then Miss Lane turned slightly to answer a quiet question from old Mrs. Pemberton, and her whole face changed. The careful neutrality softened into something real and warm, and she laughed at something the old woman said, a low and unguarded laugh, and for a moment she forgot to be Miss Lane at all. That was when I was certain. After dinner I contrived to be near the library at the hour when Mrs. Pemberton retired and Miss Lane would pass through on her way to the companions' rooms. I was not subtle about it. I had not been subtle since I was 22 and discovered that subtlety was merely a costume people wore when they lacked the nerve to be direct. She stopped when she saw me. A flicker crossed her face, quickly managed, but there. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Lane," I replied. "A moment, if you please." She did not look alarmed. She looked, if anything, resigned, the way a person looks when they have been waiting for something and it has finally arrived. I said, "You passed the salt at table with your left hand, and then corrected yourself to your right." She said nothing. "Old Mrs. Pemberton called you Beatrice when she thought no one could hear. You answered to it without hesitation." Still nothing. "And your grey dress is excellently made," I continued. "The seams are French. Lady Ashby did not pay for that dress." She was quiet for a long moment. The candlelight from the hall sconce moved across her face, and she lifted her chin in a way that had nothing of the paid companion in it whatsoever. It had everything of a woman who had been underestimated before and had long since stopped being wounded by it. "You are perceptive, Your Grace," she said. "I am irritatingly so," I agreed. "Who are you?" She considered me. I had the peculiar sensation that I was being weighed, and that the scales were not in my favour. "Lady Beatrice Calloway," she said at last, "of Calloway Hall in Derbyshire, or what remains of it. A beat. My guardian controls the estate until I marry with his approval. He arranged a match I refused. He arranged a second match I also refused." His solution was to remove my allowance and place me in Lady Ashby's household for the season, to demonstrate, I believe, the consequences of inconvenient opinions. I stared at her. You are, I said slowly, the Calloway heiress. In reduced circumstances, she said, with a ghost of that unguarded smile. Though I find I prefer honest labour to dishonest convenience, so perhaps it suits me. I knew the name. The Calloway estate was considerable. The fortune attached to it was more considerable still. Half of London had spent 2 seasons angling for the Calloway heiress, and here she was in a grey French dress being mistaken for a footnote at Lady Ashby's card parties. I should have wished her well and stepped aside. Her situation was complicated. Her guardian was Lord Fenwick, a man I found deeply tedious. The match he had arranged the second time was, I happened to know, the Earl of Dunmore, who was tedious in a far less benign direction. I said the Earl of Dunmore. Her expression answered me before she did. Yes. You will not marry him. She looked at me with those steady eyes. I am gratified to hear it. I had rather thought the same myself, though I confess it has proven difficult to enforce. It will be enforced, I said. I am not certain what came over me in that corridor. I am a man of considered action. My secretary said once that I had never done anything impulsively in my life, which I believe he intended as a compliment and which I had begun, by that autumn, to suspect was a criticism. But standing in that candlelit hall at Thornycroft with Lady Beatrice Calloway watching me with eyes that missed nothing, I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not known was fastened there. I said, Lady Ashby is hosting a musicale tomorrow evening. You will not attend as Miss Lane. You will attend as yourself. My guardian. I will manage your guardian. She regarded me steadily. You are very certain of your ability to manage things, Your Grace. I have not yet encountered a thing I could not, I said, and then thought better of my own arrogance, with the exception, perhaps, of my own better judgment when faced with an interesting problem. The ghost smile again, and this time it reached her eyes. I am a problem, then. You are a considerable one, I said. I find I do not mind. Lord Fenwick arrived the following afternoon at Thornycroft, having received a message from Lady Ashby. Not the message I would have written, but sufficient. He found me in the library. He was a man who believed that a high collar and a tight expression constituted a personality, and he looked at me across the reading table with the nervous energy of someone accustomed to winning by default, who had just realized the situation had changed. I told him, in clear and measured terms, that his ward was under my protection, that the match with Dunmore was finished, and that he would release her allowance and the use of the Calloway estate by end of the month. I told him these things politely. I am always polite. I have found that politeness, when delivered by a man of my particular reputation, carries a specificity that raised voices do not. He left for London the next morning. He wrote to me twice, and I did not reply, and the matter was settled. That evening, Lady Beatrice Calloway descended the main staircase of Thornycroft Hall in a gown of deep amber silk that I strongly suspected she had retrieved from the bottom of her travelling trunk, where she had kept it against this exact kind of moment. Lady Ashby's drawing-room went quiet by degrees, the way a room goes quiet when something unexpected and undeniable has entered it. I met her at the foot of the stairs. She looked at me and said very quietly, "You did not have to do that." "No," I agreed. "Why did you?" I thought about it. I am a man who thinks before he speaks as a rule, but the answer was already there, clear and without ceremony. "Because you are exactly who you are in a grey dress, and in an amber one," I said, "and because the world has a habit of asking remarkable women to make themselves smaller, and I find I have very little patience for that habit." She was still for a moment. Then she placed her hand on my arm, and I led her into the drawing-room, and the musicale began, and every person in that room understood without being told that something had shifted and would not be shifting back. We were engaged before the first frost of December. She insisted on a long engagement, which I granted without argument. She had spent months performing a role that was not hers, and she deserved time to simply be Beatrice Calloway in her own life, on her own terms. I spent those months learning the particular and inexhaustible territory of her mind, which proved to be the most interesting landscape I had encountered in 40 years of life. She came to Greythorne in the spring, when the park was green and the old house looked almost hopeful. I stood in the entrance hall and watched her walk through the door without a trace of the grey-dressed Miss Lane, who had arrived at Thornycroft 6 months before, and everything I had felt in that candlelit corridor came back to me, settled and certain. She turned to me with those direct eyes and said, "I shall want to see the accounts." I expected nothing less, I said. "And the walled garden, I intend to restore it. It is entirely yours." She looked at the hall around her, the high ceilings, the old portraits, the late afternoon light coming through the long windows, and then she looked at me, and I saw the moment she let the last of the constraint go. The woman who had been trained to fit into spaces, she was too large for finally standing in one that was made for her. "Good," she said, and she smiled, without a ghost or a guard or a grey dress in sight, and I thought, there she is, there she has always been. I had been bored in 3 counties and feared in all of them. I was neither, from that day forward. I was, for the first time in my life, precisely where I was supposed to be.